ever live in a place where I have enough fridge space? Can't believe that fit. Hey everyone, I'm Saffitz. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm showing you what feels to me like the quintessential summer recipe, but you can truly make it all year round. I'm making a blueberry slab pie. It's great for a crowd. It's really fun to put together, and I'm excited to show you how to make it. A slab pie is a pie that is baked in a thin, wide vessel rather than a pie plate, so you have a higher ratio of crust to filling. Easier to serve, and I like having that higher ratio of crust to filling. And one of my favorite things is that frozen blueberries are a wonderful product. You can buy like really high quality wild frozen blueberries year round, so it means that you can have that kind of taste of summer whenever you want. So even though I'm making it in summer, it's really something you can enjoy truly anytime. Check out our episode about how I make my sort of classic flaky all butter pie dough. I'm doing a double crust pie, so I have 2 portions. I've scaled this up since we're making larger volume. Then everything else is for the filling. So I have 2 1/4 pounds frozen blueberries. I was a tiny bit short, so I supplemented with just a handful of frozen raspberries. So easy. Granulated sugar. I am going to use sort of a specialty ingredient, which is just because I have it around, but for you at home, just use granulated sugar. I have lemon verbena sugar. So lemon verbena is an herb. It has a really wonderful, bright, citrusy flavor. So I just ground it up with some granulated sugar in a food processor, spread it out on a sheet tray, let it dry, and I just threw it in the freezer. Ground cinnamon, ground cardamom, and ground ginger. Cornstarch for thickening. Lemon, I'm going to use the zest and the juice. Kosher salt. Then for assembly, I have Demerara sugar, an egg for egg wash, and just a little bit of bench flour. Special equipment, I have my rolling pin, but then I think the most special piece of equipment I have here, this beautiful porcelain baking slab, a beautifully designed piece of bakeware made specifically for baking things like slab pies or flatbread or focaccia, that kind of thing. It's made of porcelain. It's going to produce a really beautiful slab pie. I'm going to start by mixing my filling. So I have my frozen blueberries plus that little handful of frozen raspberries. And I'm going to add 1/4 cup of cornstarch. That's the thickener. Blueberries aren't like the juiciest of fruits, so they don't need quite as much thickener as like a peach pie or something like that. Then I'm going to add 3/4 cup of lemon verbena sugar. Salt really helps to focus and intensify the flavor of blueberries, so I'm using a full teaspoon in the filling here. I've had blueberry recipes where it's like I can't quite put my finger on why it doesn't sort of sing and come through as brightly as it should, and I think the answer is salt. Like, it needs to be seasoned. So then I have my warm spices. I like warm spice with blueberry and with lemon too. So I have cinnamon, ground ginger, and a little bit of cardamom. So typically I would add the zest of this lemon, but because I added the lemon verbena sugar and I already have lots of that bright flavor, I'm just going to do the juice. So in baking, as in cooking, salt plus acid equals seasoning. It equals, flavor development. So the lemon's really important, the salt's really important, and then those warm spices, I just want something that tastes strongly of blueberry. So that's 4 tablespoons. That's a 1/4 cup. That goes in. And not only is calling for frozen blueberries a convenience because it's just, dump them out of a bag, and obviously it makes it makeable year round. It keeps the crust really cold when you're assembling, so it increases the work time that you have to assemble your pie. So it's just all around like a great tool. Now vanilla extract, just 2 teaspoons. Then this just gets tossed together. I just want to stir until everything is evenly mixed and coated. Once you have your filling all mixed together and it's even, I'm going to put this in the freezer because with frozen blueberries more than with fresh blueberries, you'll start to get lots of juices. An excessively juicy filling will get in the way of trying to form the pie. So I want this to stay somewhat frozen, so I'm going to put it actually back in the freezer. And then I'm going to have that just stay cold while I assemble the pie. I love slab pie, but in practice also there's some pitfalls. So in the past when I've made slab pie, I made it in a half sheet tray, which is quite large, and then I don't have another vessel large enough to fit underneath it to catch drips, and it creates like crazy smoking, oven like disaster. So I'm so excited to use this new piece of bakeware from Made In. This is their porcelain baking slab that was designed in collaboration with Chef Nancy Silverton. And when I saw it, it just kind of like hit me like, why hasn't this been done before? It's such a smart design. I love the size of it, first of all. So it's about 13 by 9. It's somewhere in between a quarter sheet tray and a half sheet tray. Not too big, not too large. It fits comfortably inside a half sheet tray, which is so key. And I think the design is really, really beautiful. So it's made in France of French porcelain. It is a naturally kind of non-stick surface, super easy to clean. I love the handles. It can go from freezer to oven. It's thermal shock resistant. So it really serves as like a baking vessel and a serving vessel all at the same time. It's just kind of like a genius piece of baking equipment. So thank you to Made In, our partner. I love working with them. I love using all the Made In bakeware and products in general. So you can get 10% off the baking slab and all other regularly priced items by going to the code below. So check it out. I have 2 portions of pie dough. So I 1.5 scaled the flaky all butter pie dough. It's my go-to recipe. You can check out that episode. And I have 2 portions of that. So obviously I'm working in a slightly bigger vessel. I'm gonna roll this out. This chilled overnight. It's always a good idea to let your pie dough rest for, minimum a few hours, but overnight is really nice because it gives the flour a chance to hydrate, so it's easier to roll out. And with slab pie and pie in general, I think it's better to err on the side of like more generous quantity of dough rather than less. So this should be more than enough crust. There should be more than enough dough to line the bottom crust of the pie. So if you've seen me roll out pastry before or make pie, you'll know that I always do this step, which is to beat the dough. Not hard enough to splinter it or crack it, but this helps to make the butter and the dough more pliable, and it doesn't warm it up, so it's easier to roll out. If you were to roll out really cold pastry, it would likely crack. This is I always say this, but like this is my yoga. This is my meditation. There's just something that feels so good about making fruit pie, and I can't really articulate it, but it's just like, I just love the assembly process. To me, it's worth all the work of like making the dough and, mixing the filling and all that. It's just really satisfying. So I'm gonna roll it a few inches larger than the baking slab in both directions. So probably something like 16 by 12, something like that. But I'm just gonna eyeball it. It's really handy to have a bench scraper to like loosen it. This size looks really nice. I know I'm gonna have like plenty of overhang when I go to assemble. To transfer the dough into the baking slab, just roll it onto the rolling pin like so, and then gently unroll it right on top of the baking slab, starting on one side. So once that dough is in there, I like to let it sort of gently slump into the bottom and up the sides. You don't want to like stretch the dough and then possibly tear it. I'm gonna roll out the second piece of dough and cut strips for my decorative top. And just because I don't want this to warm up too much, I'm gonna pop this in the fridge so that the bottom stays cold while I roll out the top. This is my second piece of dough. I'm gonna roll it out not quite as thin and as large as I rolled out the first piece of dough. I need the width to be slightly, greater than the width of the baking dish, and I want to go until it's about like 1/8 of an inch thick, between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch thick.
How much do you have stocked up in the freezer?
Of dough?
Yeah.
Well, I have some at the apartment. I don't really have much here. It would be smart though to like set that up.
Spend a day of just making sheets.
Yeah. We certainly have the freezer space. The baking slab is about 13 by 9. I have rolled this to about like between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch thick so that it is about 12 inches wide, and it's about 16 inches long. And I'm only gonna cut strips in one direction because I'm gonna sort of stagger them in one direction over the pie. So I have a ruler, and I'm just gonna really use the ruler to give me the thickness. So I'm just gonna go the thickness of the ruler. You could do any thickness you like. You could do like really wide ones, really fine ones. It's up to you. I'm using a wheel cutter. You could use just like a sharp knife. You don't need one of these. You could use a fluted one too. That could make it really pretty. So I'm not going for a specific number here. It doesn't really matter because I'm not weaving them into a lattice. So this is just like a little bit more freewheeling. So here are our strips for topping the pie. I'm gonna grab the baking slab with that bottom crust and my filling. Before I do that, I'm gonna very quickly beat this egg. The egg not only gives gloss, shine, and golden browning to the crust in the oven, but it's also like the glue that holds everything together. So sometimes when I beat an egg wash, if I have like big hunks of white, I just kind of get rid of those because they kind of get in the way. So make sure you beat it until there's no streaks. So here's my filling. It's a little juicy, but it will not create a problem for me when I go to fill the pie. It's only if you have like big pooling juices is it kind of an issue. So I'm going to scrape this into my bottom crust. Then go ahead and press the filling into the bottom of the crust and make sure you have it in an even layer. So work it all the way to those corners. And this filling will cook down some. Obviously the fruit kind of loses its volume in the oven. I'm gonna take now my egg wash and I'm just gonna paint it around the border, just on the crust, just where it kind of hits the edge of the baking slab. Again, this is like that glue. It's gonna hold everything in place. I chilled the bottom crust, and because the filling is still pretty much frozen, it's really keeping the crust super, super cold. So it just means that I have, I don't want to take all the time in the world, but I do have a bit of time to arrange my strips across the top. So I'm just going to go from one end, and I'm going to just drape it, across the filling. And then I just keep going, working in the same direction. Again, I'm not weaving, but I'm sort of staggering them and overlapping in some places. It's going to sort of look like a zigzag. So I'm overlapping them in some places and then leaving gaps in others so you see that peeking out of the filling. And I think it's kind of a fun spin on the lattice. It's definitely easier to assemble. So you don't need the strips to really extend much beyond the rim of the baking slab or the pie plate or the sheet pan, whatever you're using. Then if you have lots of excess, it tends to make like an overly thick border, which you don't want because then it won't bake all the way through and it kind of stays like gummy, and you don't want that. You want fully baked pastry all over. So I'm just taking off. You can use shears. I'm using this little Made-In paring knife. That's super sharp and easy to use. So now what I'm going to do is go, although I do want to use shears for this. I'm going to now trim the overhang on the bottom layer of pastry, and I want to trim it so that there's about a 1/2 inch of overhang all the way around. Often with slab pies, I leave a kind of raw edge where I don't trim the pastry and I just, leave that sort of natural edge. But here, since I have some to work with, I'm going to go ahead and trim it and do a little crimp. So then a little bit more egg wash on that border. So I'm going to fold up the overhang over and onto itself and then show you how to crimp. So as I am folding the dough up, I'm also pinching and pressing on those strips so that they adhere really firmly to the crust below. Now I have the bottom layer of dough folded up and over. Those strips are like fully, like sealed into the whole pie. And now the last thing before final egg wash and sugar is to do my crimp. So I like to use my thumb on one hand and then my thumb and forefinger on the other. And I do a sort of like, kind of my thumb fits into my fingers on the other hand. And I do this sort of pressing motion toward each other to make that crimp. If you have any sticking, you can grab a little bit of flour. There is my crimped edge. The pastry still feels cold. It's not getting like soft and flabby, which you don't want. So I feel pretty good about it. I'm now going to do my final egg wash, and then I have some Demerara sugar here, which is just sort of like a less refined sugar with bigger crystals, and that's going to be my finishing touch. It just makes it sparkly, gives it a little extra sweetness. So when you are creating a fruit pie, another reason why you don't want lots of pooling juices when you go to assemble is because if you get any of those juices on the pastry, those little spots tend to burn faster. So it's just really helpful to have everything frozen like I do here. So I'm going on these strips here. So when you're also applying the egg wash, try not to get big pools of the egg wash. Also, it's those places where maybe like in the valley of a crimp, along the edge, you might have some egg wash, and those also can burn a little faster than other areas. So you don't want to have excessive amounts of egg wash. Last step, I like to be really generous with the Demerara sugar. It is, the dough itself is not sweet. The filling is not overly sweet. So I think it could really use that extra bit of sugar on top. And also, because there's a lower proportion of filling to crust, it's even less sweet than like a typical pie, just because there's more crust, which is not a sweet component compared to the filling. So before we bake this, and I have my oven on 425, I'm gonna pop it into the freezer. I just wanna get the edge of the crust really cold and firm. Then it will go straight into the oven, and because I'm on this made-in porcelain baking slab, it's thermal shock resistant, so I have no problem going from freezer directly to the oven. The pie has been in the freezer for about 10 minutes. I just touched the edge. It's firm and cold, so I'm gonna put it in the oven. Again, I have my oven on 425, so when you bake a pie, I like to always start really hot, and that blast of heat initially helps to set the crust and initiate the kind of like puffing and flaking of the dough, which is really important. So I have a half sheet tray here. I love that the made-in baking slab fits comfortably in it to catch all the drips, which is like always an issue with slab pie. It's really like the perfect dimension. So I'm gonna pop it on here and then into the oven. So this will be in at this temperature for about 20 minutes, and then I'll turn it down to 350 and it will go the rest of the way. Because the slab pie is thinner, that filling heats through more quickly, and so you sort of get to the end point a little bit faster. So I think this pie will probably bake for around an hour, maybe a little longer, total. After about an hour, I noticed that the four corners were taking on a lot of color before the middle of the strips of the pie had turned golden, so I covered them with a little bit of foil. So at any point, if you see a lot of browning in one particular area, tend to with some foil. That will prevent it from burning while the rest of it bakes. Still bubbling. I love, love, love when you see the juices are thickened and these big, slow popping bubbles. It looks so good. I know it's very tempting to cut into the pie while it's still warm, but I do want to let it cool completely, because as it cools, that filling will set, and then I'll be able to slice it and get those clean slices without lots of like runny filling and juices. So try to be patient, but it is, because it's thinner, it will cool off a little bit faster than a regular pie. So I'm just gonna let it sit here until it's cool, and then we're gonna cut it. It was hard, but we were patient. We waited for it to cool. So on the bottom of the baking slab, I can feel there's no heat. So we're ready to cut it. It looks so good. I'm so excited to eat this. I'm gonna slice it. I have a bread knife here. This is the made-in bread knife, also made in partnership with Chef Nancy Silverton. It's a really beautiful knife, olive wood handle. It is fully forged, full tang, so it has great balance. It's this one single piece of metal. Really feels great in the hand. So I'm gonna go ahead and give it a slice. I can tell as I cut through that the crust on the bottom, I can tell that it's well browned just from the way the knife cuts through it. And that's what I love about this porcelain baking slab, is like you just get great heat conduction. It's gonna have a great browning and caramelization on the bottom. Ooh, ah. Ooh, doesn't that look good? Yum. I get so happy when I see pie with like set but still juicy filling. It's not gloopy. Wow. You really kind of get the lemon verbena at the end, and it's this sort of really complex, subtle flavor that blends so well with the blueberries and also the warm spices. It's so tasty. I think could have used maybe like a little bit more salt just to really bring out the flavor, but it is an intensely blueberry-y filling, which I love. This is like, to me, the really perfect summertime dessert, but I also love that you can make it any time of year because there's frozen blueberries. And I think this is maybe my favorite slab pie that I've ever made, mostly because of like the dimensions and the proportions are so nice in this made-in baking slab. It's really the right size, not too big, not too little. And I particularly love how the crust got so caramelized and browned and crispy because it's made of this beautiful French porcelain, which is such a great baking material, naturally nonstick. And I'm also excited to bake in the baking slab like all year long. I can see making focaccia in it, doing grandma pie. I also plan on using it as a beautiful like serving dish for charcuterie platters and, you know, crudité and all those things. And I love the functionality of going straight from the freezer to the oven. So thank you to Maiden, our partner for this episode. Love the baking slab. Don't forget you can get 10% off this or any other full price item by using the code below. And thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.